just put in perspective, because we've been talking about the Imajine results today, but Imajine was part of a call which also involved two other projects, COHSMO and REOCAL. And before Imajine, there was also Perceive as another project which was touching on some of these issues. So we've got two presenters in the room. Hans Tor Andersen from Aalborg University, who was the coordinator of COHSMO, and Pavel, who is going to join us and talk previously, was involved in Perceive. And hopefully we're also going to be joined online by Saralta and MF, who is part of the REOCAL project. So Hans and Pavel, do you like to come to the front? Yes, so if you would like to go and we'll start with you, Hans, if you want to give your presentation. We'll just get these up and started. Yeah, that's fine. We'll take the seats after the presentation. Yeah, so I think really that the spatial justice of to the fore that there's actually which have been working at this issue. So we've each taken slightly different approaches to this, but I think there's a clear dialogue potentially between the ideas that we have. So I will hand over to Hans first to start with us.
Microphone. And thanks for the invite, first of all. Okay, I have only 15 minutes, I was told, and to boil 4 years down to 15 minutes is quite an effort. And I know that my colleagues did it much better. They had 5 years in 5 minutes, but let's see how it goes. The COHSMO project was actually dependent. Now, how do I switch here? No? So can I use the enter? Oh, more power. More power, that's the way. So this was the starting point. I can say we just finished all the reporting, all the work with the commission, got a very nice evaluation, despite we did not come up with a clear definition of what do we understand with the concept of spatial justice. I'm not sure we ever get closer to this, since it's one of these modern political concepts that everybody likes, but very few people understand exactly what it is. But it makes it more flexible, of course. So one of the discussions have been, why are some places on the sunny side and others in the shadow? We have already listening this morning to presentations of various inequalities, and even we could compare national levels or regional levels or local levels, or even at street levels or household levels. We are different. And the key question is then, why does these differences appear, and what does it mean in the long run? Are they going to be more permanent differences? So we tried to find a way of understanding spatial inequalities and also how you could cope with them. But social justice can never be everything is equal. We cannot have 1 million city and a village where things are completely similar. There are some advantages of living in a village if you like space, fresh air, but on the other hand, it takes some more time to get to the shops or to other services if you like that. So this is our conceptual understanding. Again, this is just the highlights. We are thinking about territorial cohesion as an interplay between the capital, the collective efficacy, which you might call the social capital of a community of a group of people. It was originally developed as a way of understanding how you can make better teaching at schools, but it's a different thing. And then territorial governance, the way we organize space in terms of government or other authorities are not incidental. It's really something that has long effects, long-standing effects. And territorial cohesion is also dynamic. It creates a lot of changes and make us behave in certain ways in order to fulfill what we are supposed to do in our job. If you are the mayor of a municipal unit, you are supposed not to involve too much in your neighbors' businesses, for instance. So the borders make sense. Come on, there. So we need to make it a more relational approach in order to find out on how we should understand territorial problems, but also how it changes over time to capture the articulations of historical, political, geographical interconnections, and how we can make legitimation of governance strategies. And we can find that there's a focus on how localities cluster around particular compositions. I will give just a few examples of this. So the way we approach this, because we cannot cover everything, we try to combine infrastructure, balance services, or the lack of the same, including social investments, local governance competences, and collective efficacy. And furthermore, we cut in order to make our life easier, we cut the approach into looking at metropolitan areas, rural areas, and suburban areas. As you know better than most others, it's very difficult to compare places, even when we talk about a big city. Milano in Lombardia is a really big city compared to the Danish case of a big city was Aarhus, which is a city with nearly 500,000 people. This is, of course, a major problem when you try to compare things. But anyway, Europe is not on the same formula, so you have to accept this. And again, here you can see a few examples of how we can compare this and place different units. On the one hand, we have service gap in the lower end, and on the top, we have those who have balanced services. And you can do the same with rural areas, suburban areas, metropolitan areas, etc. And we looked into 3 main types of services: active labor market policy, early childhood care, and vocational training, and found out that some of the countries that performed best were those who had strong local autonomy and a good support from central government, while cities or countries that offered less autonomy to the local units had more problems of reacting to the challenges they faced. And there are some examples here. In Bristol, the UK, they had a facilitative leadership. There was a development of institutional capital, strong networking, partnerships, collaboration between sectors, etc. In Gdansk in Poland, it was strong emphasis on nurturing local communities and planning and decision-making and so on. And all these examples, here are Vienna and Horsens in Denmark, again, it's local-based networking. So it's the skills of people, of leaders and businesses, bringing the forces that can act together and make them do things also together. So one thing we concluded was local conditions have increasing importance. So it's the local level, as the former speakers told about. Central governments can set the rules, but it's the local level that have to act. That's an important thing. And the reason is, of course, that local conditions differ from place to place, and therefore you cannot make one-size-fits-all solutions to these challenges. But also local capacity differs. So you have, and local capacity becomes very important. That's the social capital, or the precondition for having the ability to, so to speak, change your own destiny, to improve your opportunities. And most problems and policies in countries are seen from the center. So it's national level. They have their priorities. Often the capital is a million city, like London or Copenhagen or Athens or Warsaw. But in the rural areas, things look a bit different. And they often feel that they are told to act on conditions that are not fitting with their own living conditions, and therefore the solutions become less efficient. So local competences and social capital can increase collective efficacy and hence provide conditions for spatial justice. And very last, thanks. And if you want to check some of the outcome, there's a lot of deliverables presented at the website COHSMO.aau.dk. Thanks.
And Sir Walter, I can see you there. Can you hear us?
Should I be the next one? Hello?
Yes, please. So if I hand over to you.
So thank you very much. I'm Charlotte Niemet, representing one of the sister projects of Imajine, REOCAL, from the same core of Horizon 2020. I'm from the coordination team from the University of Eastern Finland. And with my colleagues, James Scott, Patrick Ahila, and Matti Fritsch, we have been working with our big consortium from 2016 to 21. So we concluded this project last year, a bit later than planned because of COVID, a little bit delayed with COVID, because of COVID. So we have been running parallel with yours. And I see, of course, a lot of common interests and overlaps, but we had a specific focus with REOCAL. Basically, we were trying to identify the factors that condition local accessibility of European policies, the local abilities to articulate needs and equality claims, and local capacities for exploiting those European opportunity structures, cohesion policies. To carry out the project, we had 14 partners from 12 countries during those 4 years of work. And our initial hypothesis was that the processes of localization and place-based public policy can make a positive contribution to spatial justice and democratic empowerment. So our starting point was that the role of the local is crucial and should be enhanced when we would like to increase spatial justice and territorial cohesion across the European Union. And because of this hypothesis, we had the two key concepts, spatial justice and locality, very intricately interlinked. And that was basically the basis of our conceptual and analytical framework for our research. On the left side, you see a simplified diagram of that. So basically, this is about relationships within the locality, across the localities, and between a locality and the various higher level regional, national, and European institutions. who are some way or another are in charge of policies, regional development and for territorial cohesion. Besides this, one important feature of our project was that we dominantly worked with very qualitative data. We used 33 case studies from the 12 countries from 11 countries to come to our answers. And we looked at those cases and the material from various analytical perspectives, which we find are key to understand this problematic, the role of the local in territorial cohesion and in strengthening spatial justice. And these three conceptual analytical angles were represented by independent work packages, which run parallel and worked together with the fieldwork and analysis and the comparison of the 33 cases we ended up with. So they provided also the framework for those analytical reports which were created based on the cases. They provided the universal frame for those reports. So we tried to be less descriptive and more analytical in these reports, which this was an important methodological challenge for us, because evidently, as we heard, it's difficult to have such a diversity of local cases which really covers all possible types and contextual phenomena which can happen in Europe in terms of the role of the local in territorial cohesion. So these three specific angles were for example, the perceptions by the local and of the local in terms of spatial injustice. So what spatial injustices are perceived by the local and from outside, and the capacities of the local to treat these spatial injustices. The other one was related to the vertical embeddedness of the locality, so multi-level governance and various governance arrangements, and how they affect what practices there are, territorial governance practices, how they affect territorial cohesion and spatial justice. And the third one, importantly, was regarding communities and interest groups and how they organize themselves in the localities, what scope for maneuver they have in various situations, how their actions relate or are being limited by higher levels, higher scales of intervention, how autonomous local actions can be in this regard. We had 33 cases, and from all over Europe, you see them. We focused on actions. So the case studies were not based on the locality. Locality was a secondary issue. We looked for interesting actions which were carried out for improving spatial justice for a local area, which could be a neighborhood and even a bigger region. So we had various different local levels, from neighborhoods to little villages, a city, a bigger region, a leader sub-region area, very different situations. Also, we had urban, intermediate, and very rural areas in our sample. We had actions which were initiated from above, so top-down actions, but also we had some which were really grassroots actions, but there were also various combinations of these two directions. So that was increasing the diversity of our cases, and of course making our conclusions and comparisons especially a bit difficult and laborsome. But all in all, we investigated how place-based strategies could contribute to spatial justice and the democratization across the European Union. We have some important deliverables which are all accessible online. One was this synthetic report of the 33 case studies and some pictures from therefrom. You see that the topics of the cases in terms of what kind of spatial injustice the actions were addressing were very different. We had some which looked about isolation, structure renewal, or stigmatization was the key issue, environmental sustainability, infrastructural problems, and so on, and governance processes as well. So we had a diversity there, and as I mentioned, there were quite many cases which were not clearly just top-down or bottom-up, but there were combinations of these two directions of intervention in those actions we have studied. How to consolidate all this material and crystallize some policy relevant considerations, recommendations, and punchier policy messages. That was other big challenge from such huge amount of qualitative data, where we went through all the 33 individual case study reports and their comparative synthesis. And we also incorporated the key messages from those 3 analytical angles we have kept up during the project. And we had a special work package which also created some scenarios, and they were scenarios on the local level. So each and every action was examined in terms of how those actions can reach their goal of spatial justice within certain contexts or within certain systems of change in the near future by 2030. That was an interesting part of our work too, which gave us some good policy insights. And then of course we had, and it was a requirement from us also to carry out a continuous and intensive interaction with various level stakeholders, policy stakeholders from our cases and the regions and national level, as well as from Europe. And we had dedicated discussions on policy implications with our own big research family of REOCAL, with all the teams every time we had a meeting, to kind of keep this issue in hand and be able to respond to actual challenges and questions, policy questions. So in our final work, which was from work package 9, the policy considerations, we tried to pull together the key observations, issues which emerged from our cases and our empirical work, link those to the key challenges which we initially and during the project also outlined. So these are known to all of you: continuing disparities despite European cohesion policy being in place for long, legitimacy crisis of the EU, the still persisting conflict between welfare and growth claims, how to put them on the same page. Higher level public interventions are still not very place-based friendly. So that was another challenge we identified. Also the weak local capacities for action. So there's a kind of a structural embeddedness. Spatially unjust positions are reproduced because of this low capacity to combat them. And then an additional one which we observed regarding cohesion policy programs as such, that basically quite often the requirements, funding criteria, and this big concern with impact measurement and monitoring indicators and so on, often are against the idea of experimentation and therefore innovative actions on the local level. And how to resolve this problem, it's also an important question. On the right side in the table, you see some of the key sub-chapters in our bigger reports, and these all come from a certain sets of case studies, actual fieldwork material, some answers, some comments and insights that relate to these challenges. We group those considerations by these 6 challenges in this table, and I don't really have time, I think, to go into further detail in that, but rather go to the last 2 slides, which are 8 points of our punchy policy messages, which kind of simplify these more complex policy considerations to be briefer now. So the first one was that place-based does not equal bottom-up. It's often a misunderstanding. It requires cooperation between and coordination of actions at all scales. And this is often forgotten. Transparency in delivering EU cohesion policy has to be still substantially increased. This means more attention to communicating to and consulting with citizens. member states also have a responsibility, and they need to empower their local actors and commit to providing an institutional environment that is friendly and enabling local agency and capacity building. European structural funds and investment programs on the European level also, there has to be more attention paid to the inclusion of social partners, and this should be a horizontal principle in all programs. The fifth policy message was that local development strategies should include a cross-cutting objective to promote deliberative and participatory arrangements in the implementation, but also in the monitoring and evaluation of the local development actions. This is important to increase trust, to create legitimacy of policies on various levels, but also eventually it's leading to citizens closer to Europe, which is now, of course, an important priority 5 of the current programming period. So this is a message that this indeed is an important aspect to improve in Europe. The EU should continue to play a role in further pushing local and regional governments and help creating a political momentum for the support of local and integrated development strategies. And an interesting message still, which probably has not been thought of before, that sometimes even the policies, the top-down initiatives and frameworks reinforce some stigmatization or prejudice against certain territories and types of regions, which is counteractive to their development. So stigmatization should be combated also on that level. It has turned out to be a bigger problem than we originally had thought in REOCAL. And finally, the programming of the structural funds should give more space to learning and innovation by allowing more experimentation. So more risk-taking is worth it, because if there's some more risk involved, that's on the one hand, but there's more possibility for innovation and discovering new ways and methods than if we keep ourselves safe and measurable and within a strict framework. So more fluidity or flexibility, more acceptance of failure could be somehow built into the programs of cohesion policy, which target the promotion of actions, place-based actions in the European Union. And I stop here. Thank you for your attention. Please visit our website for all our material, final reports and newsletters and such. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Sir Ultra. Again, some very interesting findings there. And finally, for this session, I'll hand over to Pavel to talk about the findings of the Perceive project.
Thank you very much. All right. Welcome. Thank you for your invitation. Before we start, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Pablo Krininsky. I'm perfect. So I work here in this building. So this is my privilege and a big pleasure. I work for the Institute for Rural Agriculture Development of the Polish Academy of Sciences. But I will talk about like the very, very old, because the project that was before the war and before the pandemic of the 2016 and 2019 and called Perceive. This project I took together with two colleagues we have here, Zbigniew Florenczyk and Barbara Wieliczko, of my co-workers and colleagues from this and previous work. We were investigating the perception, like the keyword for this project was perception, and evaluation of the regional cohesion policies by Europeans and the identification with the values of Europe. So basically, we were looking at the perception of the citizens of EU policies, but also like how do they perceive through the policies, and the question if they identify with the values of Europe, like the European project. So First, about few words about the perceive. The consortium and like the idea was very interdisciplinary because like this project gathered together various experts from different disciplines. So like the also regional economists, regional geographers, economists, but also like the political scientists and the people working with investigation of like the journalism, so like the journalist studies. All right. So we try to better understand the relationship between the European regional policies, but also like what is the local and regional identities and the perception of the added value of the EU by its citizens. However, like the added value was a consequence of the activities, like the programs, but also like of course the structural funds. And as I mentioned, those the structure of the consortium. Sorry, I cannot change this. Maybe I would try to. Yes, okay. So we are covered different institutions, like of course different countries with the different backgrounds, and for us, perceive like the perception of the EU activities in the regional and the national level had two different backgrounds. One is like the rational choice perspective. So like we are stressing the idea of institutions of rules of game. So this is how the policy is developed. And the other perspective from the social constructivist perspective, that the European identities and identification emerge from the process of social learning. So like the interrelation between the Europe and its citizens creates those perception. We also we did the different field work like that. We did the in-depth interviews with local managing authorities, also with practitioners. We did like the pan-European survey that was covering 17,000 like European inhabitants. We did also the case study regions that were very, very important source of information for our projects. So we did different like different characteristics of a region were chosen to choose them in Romania, Poland, Italy, United Kingdom, Spain, Austria, and Sweden. So like first I would like to show very shortly 8 like merge into the 7 key messages from the project, because this will be, I guess, the good starting point for the discussion. So like the project, I will not show like what the study is behind, but like I would like to show you the outcomes. So like the first finding, the big finding is that the Europe has a problem with communication. Like communication of a cohesion policy is not effective because it like tells the story about in the very, very bureaucratic way, how do we support certain spheres of development. However, it's not directed to the citizens. And especially if we found that like the European projects still use the very traditional channels of the communication, like the television, and actually fails in communicating the outcomes, like the activity through the social media channels, for example. Another outcome of the project is the statement that allocating structural fund is not sufficient to obtain consent. So like the benefiting from the funds does not necessarily imply supporting the European project and identification with the Europe. So for example, in Calabria, who is a huge recipient of the EU funds, the awareness of this of the policies on the level of 10%. and the share of the population which is against the EU is even is less like higher than 1/3 of the whole Calabria. So this is like a lot of money goes, and the perception, the identification, it's not working at this level. Another statement: half of the European citizens are not aware of EU policy. Like this varies across the different countries, but also through the different regions. Therefore, there is like another statement in the 3 that recognition of EU policies is higher among the new member states. Therefore, Europe faces the 2-speed scenario. So citizens from the countries that joined the European Union recently, they are more aware because of the better public consultation processes and the more attention by the media, for example. And in the old members, the awareness about the policy and the perception of how effective it is quite low. For example, in the Netherlands, it was like the only 24% of the citizens can recognize what was supported by the EU policy, and even lower in the UK. It was just before the Brexit. So like when we took the Essex region, there was only like 80% aware of EU funds impact on their localities, especially in the local level. In Poland, there was 80% in Warmińsko-Mazurskie, traditional rural region in the north of Poland. So this is very interesting. And the other that comes with that is that not all Eurosceptic governments govern Eurosceptic people, of course. Yeah? So this is a big conclusion in line with the other projects with COHSMO and REOCAL, saying that this is totally different on the national level and the local. So local policies are very, very, let's say, vulnerable for the identity. So if we catch in the narrative of the funds distribution and how we explain about the EU funds on the local level, and we attach it to the local identity values, they will go well. And this was made especially in Poland just pre-accession, because we were very afraid that we will not, the majority of Poles will not vote for the accessing to the EU. So even journalists, there was the big movement of the people to explain how the Europe is consistent with the local identity and the local development. So this is also the outcome of the project. And then, of course, the demographic, economic, and the spatial roots matter. So there is a big difference between the rural and urban perspectives, and also the how old, how well educated the respondents were. And next one is the investments can still be fundamental in amplifying awareness, but first we try to combine the level of awareness with the funds expenditure. It did not work at all. It more was what was the structure of the expenditure. So more funds well spent for the public consultation, networking, but also the communication with the citizens worked better for those regions. And finally, one of the conclusions that the national institutional quality of corruption impacts citizen trust in the EU. And this is something what is, I guess, in line with all the debate we have today, about the special justice and the feeling of trust or of confidence in the institutions, which is from this project in other studies shows that that it matters a lot. As a Polish team, we also try to look closer because there was every study says that there's a clear distinction between rural and urban areas concerning the perceptions and how is the perception of the EU as a project. We try to also investigate from the point of view of the policies, so like cohesion rural policies, and this is only to show a few things that we found that there are the relationship between the cohesion and rural policy expenditures in some geographic areas. These were the mainly concerned, and this was a very nice case of Poland, in the areas where there were big dominance of agriculture and removed from the biggest agglomerations. And what we found is that the general trust, the very good communication, storytelling about EU funds, and the most important, the strong institutions and the local and regional level matter the most for the perception of the citizens. And we believe that this is the same utilitarian conclusion of this project to today's discussion. Thank you very much for now.
Thank you, Pavel. So, and while we are running a little into lunch, so I suggested we're going to take, is there potentially a couple of questions people have for Hans or Pavel or Sarolta? We shall take those together and last for questions for though maybe 5 minutes or so to burning questions on those. So does anyone have a question? Patrick.
Thank you. Yeah, Pavel, actually, I have a question for you and your concept of Euroscepticism, because I was wondering how you measured it and how you approached it, because I was quite surprised by the finding that you said when people trust national institutions, they're more concerned about corruption at the European level. But at the same time, when we look at Eurobarometer data, we see that support for Europe is mainly high in those countries where there's also high support for national governments. And I was wondering if there's a bit of a contradiction there, and if you have an explanation where those tensions come from in those findings.
Are there any other questions before Pavel answers that? If not, I'll just go to...
Okay, thank you very much. There is a the perception of the from the outcomes of the project, of course, the perception of the European Union, as a case of new member states, for example. There was the situation that is no longer valid, that the pre-accession, the communication of the EU had a very good positive impact on the regions, even in the regions where the lower income or lower level of governance. So at that time, the perception and the agreement with agreeing of the people with the values of Europe were higher than later on. And the key issue is the communication, and this is the one of the message of the project, that in no matter what the level of the development is the region, the good communication matters. And the same was the same issues were confirmed by the for example, studies on the quality of government in the regional level, where also the perception of the institutions and local authorities does not rely on like the economic performances. So probably like the more in the Central Eastern region, European regions, like the big support for from the cohesion and rural policies have the main strong positive impact among the perception of the Europe. So I don't know if I answered your question. Okay.
Okay. And I just have a question for Hans and for Srolta just to finish with, which is we were all responding to the same call brief, and that talked about spatial justice and the ideas. So maybe you could just reflect the extent to which you use spatial justice and whether spatial justice made a difference in your view to the analysis you were able to do in your research.
Well, I would say that it's very difficult to work with a concept that you have such a, let's say, loose sense of what it really is. So when you are working with it, you try to figure out something you can really get your hands off. And that's why we see so many examples of inequalities, but we don't really get into the matter. Why is it a problem that some people have higher density or earns a bit more or less, etc.? What does it really mean? What we did instead was also trying to look for the qualitative approach that could help us understand what is it that generates these long-lasting differences of being able to cope with, let's say, unemployment or lagging behind. And I think we managed to come up with some answers to this, but still it's so difficult to get into it. It's very much sense of how people can act to something, and it's difficult to be a planner, I'm pretty sure. Now I had just listening to Pablo and understand that quality of government is also such a nice concept. Once we move into that, trying to uncover what is it, we also end up with a lot of difficult issues, I think. But social justice is such a positive concept. Who can be against it? But when it's only when we start to talk Denmark, Britain, Poland, it means a little different each time. And well, just in our case, it's something else. And that makes it so difficult.
And Srolta, I don't know if you can hear me. For REOCAL, what did spatial justice?
I think for us, it was definitely an advantage to use this concept. Of course, acknowledging that the definition is there's not a single definition. We had to do much research and reading on really understanding the differences of the understanding of this concept. It gave us the procedural and the distributive elements, which were really useful analytically for our work. But beyond that, when we had to translate it into our fieldwork, to our studied actions and communicate this concept, that was no way to call it spatial justice. In most of the cases, we could not translate it. But that actually raised our awareness of this problem, which you also emphasized, Michael, that basically, first we need to understand what it means for whom, how it's perceived. It's a key already in the hand if you understand how these are perceived. But also we need to know what we want it to be in Europe and in whatever context. What actually is the aim? What is what we want to reach to? So this fluidity, this broadness of the concept helped us to include much more angles, perspectives into our research than originally. If we had called it territorial differences, or I don't know, we thought about a lot of possibilities when we had to translate it into the national languages in our work, but it really helped us in the end, although we had to struggle with it, as I heard everyone had this issue. I think it was beneficial for us, and I think it's still a good concept because it's still relatively open, and there's more research needed continuously and continuing on this, I think, in Europe. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I mean, that's always the good conclusion to finish on, is that more research is required. But I think it certainly is in this case that I don't think any of us has really cracked the nut of spatial justice. But I think what we have done is highlighted lots of further questions about it and issues of how it might be used, but things we need to explore further. So I think, you know, I see what we've been trying to do with spatial justice as the start of a process of thinking through these issues. And I think there's an awful lot of extremely interesting and good empirical evidence which has come out of certainly these three projects and projects like Perceived beforehand, which will help to shape that. And